Life is so strange that I would become a professional interpreter of poetry. Life is weird. I have no acumen for poetry. High school English was my terror. I took one class in college, a poetry class, because the woman I was dating was taking the class. And when we broke up, I broke up with poetry. I like prose. I read for content and I read fast, and I want you to tell me what you're thinking. I don't want to decode it. Bring me the content. I have no native ability to interpret poetry, but now I'm a minister. And so much of the Bible is poetry. I don't mean that poetically. I mean it's literally poetry. Book after book in the Hebrew prophets is stanzas of Hebrew poetry. And so here I am, and my role is to interpret a poem to you. I'll ask for God's help. You see, Isaiah 40 is a poem, and we put it in your bulletin as a paragraph. This does violence to the form. It's actually in stanzas and verses, just like most poems. Now, I remember two things from my poetry class. First, that you need to know the wider setting of a poem. I can handle this, let me tell you. Isaiah 40 is being written during the Babylonian exile. Do you remember that Babylon as an empire destroyed Israel and then deported many of the elite and some 10,000 people back to Babylon? They've been there now 50 years when this poem is written. They're doing fine, but they have been longing for so many years to get back home. And now that hope is bone tired. They're not physically tired, they're doing fine, but they're losing hope. And then this poem is offered to them. That's the setting. The second thing I remember about poetry is if you see a word repeated, pay close attention. You see, a poet deploys a word with great intention and precision. I'm speaking to you off the cuff. I'm speaking orally, which is haphazard and improvisational. To speak orally is like a shotgun blast, but when a poet picks a word, it's a rifle shot, right to the point. And when a word repeats itself, pay attention. A word repeats itself in this poem 4 times. Did you see? Weary. God does not faint or grow weary. God gives strength to the weary. They will run and not grow weary. Even youths grow weary. Now, the word weary in Hebrew is used 77 times in the Old Testament, but it comes in a couple clusters. That word weary appears in a clump in the book of Job numerous times. Job, so weary from his suffering. And then another cluster emerges when the people of Israel are traveling through the wilderness. They're trying to get home year after year, and they grow weary. Our word weary doesn't just speak to being physically exhausted. Weary is a type of mental enervation. You're just wiped out emotionally. Weary. And then the poem says, God gives strength to the weary. Oh, this sets my imagination on the move. God gives strength to the weary. I know God doesn't show up like a caped Avenger hero and just fix it when I'm feeling weary. I know that. So what does the poet mean that God gives strength to the weary? I know when I really need help, God just doesn't fly in and make it all right. So what does the poet mean? Maybe God is that love and energy that is the ground of all being. Maybe it's that I need to become aware that I am being held by a love that will not let me go. I rest my weary soul in thee, that in thy ocean depths its flow, that I am immersed in this loving energy. I am not alone. And then I notice the end of this poem. It doesn't end the way you would expect. The verses are exactly reversed. If you want to make a poem sensational, you would reverse those last verses. You would say, they will walk and not be faint. They will run and not grow weary. They will soar on wings of eagles. That's how you write a sensational poem. You do a crescendo. But the poet uses a diminuendo. Why? Why end with the soft, they will walk and not be faint? Because when you're weary, you don't want to be told. You can immediately soar. When you're weary, you need to know that if you can just put one foot forward, that you are being held and you are not alone, that if you can just take even one step forward, and then God will bring renewal